Hello and welcome. My name is Donna Cryer. I am the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute, and I have the great privilege of being your host today for this very special episode of GLI Live. This month, April, is Donate Life Month, and the specific topic that we'll be discussing and that prompted this conversation are the issues around organ donation and the miracle of transplantation. We wear blue and green, and we celebrate life renewal every spring. And certainly in the 26 springs that I've been able to enjoy since my own transplant, this is always a very special time for me. The title of this show is Celebrating the Gift of Life, Stories of Tragedy and Triumph. And I would be remiss if I didn't address the moment and the applicability of that title to the national conversation and the national mood, to the issues that America has been dealing with, not just for 24 hours since 1:44 p.m., not just for 11 months, but for hundreds of years since our founding. It is fitting this morning, the day after the reading of the verdict of the trial of the state of Minnesota versus Derek Michael Chauvin. And I say that in its official name because we as a people, as a country, what was on trial over these past few months, what was at stake was whether we as a nation, as a people, believed in the rule of law, if we believed in accountability, if we believed not just in the humanity of George Perry Floyd Jr., but if we believed in the humanity of each and every one of us. And so although guilty verdicts were issued, to paraphrase the Minnesota State Attorney General, would not call this justice because justice is restorative. This is a step towards justice. This is the start. And so if you'll indulge me just a moment further, and my 50-some-year-old eyes allow, I'll read from something I hold very dear, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have a lot of work to do to ensure that everyone is able to enjoy these rights fully, equally, equitably. And I will put a song at the end of this, in the show notes of this song. It's something I've been listening to this morning that I think is equally applicable, but particularly as a transplant recipient, and as we talk through stories of tragedy and ultimately of triumph for us all, and the work that we still have ahead of us. The lyrics in part to Marvin Sapp's My Testimony go, in spite of the storm and rain, heartache and pain, still alive, but I made it through. All of us who are still alive today, who made it through, have an obligation to everyone who did not. And so that's what today's conversation is about. And although it is a heavy topic, it seems, it is such a story of light. And there are no two people that I could think of who embody this light more and can lead this conversation for us all than my guests today. And while I usually just sort of gloss over the extensive biographies of my guests, I want to spend a moment because these two people are both so special, as all of our guests are, but are so broad and distinct in what they bring to this conversation that I wanted to spend a moment and make sure that you all recognize what you're hearing and who you're hearing it from. So Dr. Dara Kass is the founder of FemInEM, and she is an emergency medicine physician and an advocate for advancement of women in medicine. She is also the mother of Hannah, Charlie, and Sam. She and Sam have a very special bond that we will explore in this story. And I'm so glad that you have the opportunity to hear it. Delores Benton Evans is like me, an attorney, but a social worker. She owns a real estate company. She's an entrepreneur as well. She is a teacher, and I think that will come through and be evident to all of you as the daughter of school teachers. I value that so much. She has been recognized by Governor of Purdue, appointed to the North Carolina license to give trust commission, and by Governor Pat McCrory. She's the first African-American member appointed to this commission. And there's so many other awards and distinctions, but I want to get to our conversation, which is about the 100,000 people who are waiting for a liver transplant. The 10 people who are the people who are added every 10 minutes, the 7,000 who die every year, 20 people even today. So, Dr. Kass, let me allow you to start by orienting people to the experience of recognizing that your child needed a transplant. Most people think children get liver diseases, and how it affected you.
So the story starts, I guess, at the beginning of our life, which is that I was a doctor. My husband worked in finance. We had 2 kids. Things are going swimmingly. We get pregnant with our 3rd child, and he is smaller than the other 2. But, we wrote it up to just, one of them is going to be the runt of the litter. And so we're going to just have to deal with that. And as he was born, and even as he was supposed to grow for the first few weeks of life, he was a little smaller than he was supposed to be. And, when you're an emergency medicine doctor and you're a mom, you have to really decide where you're going to live, right? Are you going to live in the alarmist zone? Or are you going to live in the everything is going to be fine zone? Women have been giving birth in fields for generations, and we get in the way of progress more than we actually contribute to it. So let's just let things lie. And I'm much more of the second, which is that when something is bad, it comes to you. Mm-hmm. And so we watched this, him not gain weight, and realized that very quickly that he had inherited a disease from me and my husband. So it was actually congenital. It was a recessive gene that had caused him to have a very rare disorder that was having an effect on his liver. So the disease itself is not a liver disease primarily, but it was affecting his liver, and more importantly, it was affecting his growth. And so we started very quickly giving him supplements, following it, and realized within his first year that this was a disease that was going to get him very quickly to cirrhosis, which is the liver disease that's the end. It's kind of the common final pathway for all scarring liver diseases. Mm-hmm. And that he was going to need a transplant. And so when he's a year old, his doctors came to me in the emergency department of the hospital that I work in now and said, would you consider being a donor? And then you kind of wear all the hats at the same time, because it's really hard to separate, and I think Ms. Evans will speak to the idea of being a mother and a social worker and a lawyer and all these things, you put it all together. But as a physician, I knew the process of seeking an organ, right? I knew what it would be like for my son to be on the list. And that was something that I was really interested in avoiding, if I could, which was there something immediately that I could do by just going to sleep on a bed in a hospital, in an operating room, and then immediately giving them a chance to save his life. And that seemed like a really small lift for me as a mom, considering all the other things that would have had to happen, including, unfortunately, somebody else passing away. Mm-hmm. And so I said yes. And so I was the donor to my, at that time, ultimately 2-year-old child. Livers are really kind of cool organs, I say to people, right? They're basically flowers, and when you take away a petal, the petal grows back. It doesn't look the same, but it's good enough. And more importantly, because they're so restorative in their ability to process toxins, they're a really good organ to donate, because there's a good process by which it gets taken up. So we were very lucky. So on my son's 2nd birthday, basically, I donated a 1/3 of one of the segments of my liver to him, and he received it, and that was 7 years ago. We've had a few bumps along the way, but nothing too dramatic. I think that if you're not experiencing any rejections ever in your process, they say that your medications are too high, so we will take that. But the interesting part, I think, has been the process of keeping him normal, especially over the last year, with the risk of infections and all that stuff, making this not be a defining moment of his life, right? Having his world not be about being a transplant kid, but also reminding him of the importance of taking his medications and being grateful for what has happened to him. And then also, realizing that things can fall back sometimes. And so we can deal with a rejection, or we can deal with an uncertainty. And how do we process that in a way that doesn't take the floor out of all of our stability? So that's our story, and I'm happy to talk more about it, but I'm also very, very much looking forward to Ms. Evans' story because I find it to be both fascinating and inspiring.
Thank you. And Dara, before we move on, can you just name the disease so that people...
Sure. Sure. Our son has alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which again is primarily disease of lungs. Most people hear of it later in life, but as a consequence of protein malformation, the protein can get stopped up in the liver and not processed well, and that's the liver disease. It's basically just an aggregate of protein not going anywhere. And so unfortunately, a fraction of the patients that have it end up with liver disease. Most adults later on have some aspect of cirrhosis after a lifetime of protein malformation, but a very small fraction of young children need transplants from this, and we were one of those families.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have so many patients from our Pediatric and Rare Liver Diseases Council who need to know that there are others out there, and we thank you for that. So, Ms. Evans, tell us about your son first, and then your both. I want to hear both stories because April is about honoring both the donors and the recipients.
Well, thank you. But before I get into our story, I must thank you, Mrs. Cryer, for this awesome opportunity, and also for the pleasure of being on with Dr. Kass, because she's reminded me that I also need to include in my presentations talking about a recessive gene, which I'll get to later. But to begin with, I was made aware back in about 1972, 73, even before Ryan was born, that I had a problem with my kidneys. In the beginning, they thought that I had lupus. But then after extensive research, it was determined that it wasn't lupus, but there still was an issue with the kidneys. But I was able to function. I was able to deliver 2 children, and then we adopted another child. So we were doing fine. And then in the early 2000s, around about 2006, I just basically collapsed. And when I was hospitalized, the doctors told me then that my creatinine was so high and that I was having kidney failure and that I would need to go on dialysis. Fortunately, and I'm so glad that I heard Mrs. Cryer talk about, you could just tell that she resonates with faith too. I knew that even though this was a traumatic time, that it was going to be okay, because I collapsed at a shopping center, and there was a nurse in the parking lot who had a blood pressure. She had a blood pressure kit, and they didn't know what was wrong. Anyway, to make a long story short, she was able to, she told me while we were waiting on the ambulance that I was going to be okay. So in my mind, I thought that this was God letting me know that even though you're getting ready to go through something, that I got an angel there to guide you. I really did, and that helped me to start out from the beginning being positive. Well, to make a long story short, we tried diet and the medication, but eventually I did have to go on what we call peritoneal dialysis. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we knew that I would need dialysis, Ryan, I have 3 children, Ryan was the second son, but I always tell people that out of 3 children and 2 parents, including his father and myself, Ryan was the best one of all of us. He had this personality. He didn't criticize people. And I was telling Mrs. Cryer early that he could just charm anyone and it was sincere. And he always found a way to make a negative thing positive. That's the way Ryan was. And he was the first one. As a matter of fact, neither one of the other 2 children volunteered to be a donor, even though I assumed that they would have. But Ryan made it known and even went through the testing. And that was when we learned. I knew that I had the sickle cell trait, but I didn't know that Ryan had inherited the trait. So once that was found out, he couldn't be a living donor. I was not, I'm not of the personality type just to do a whole lot of talking about negative things.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I try not to be a bragger, but I didn't do a lot of talking about the fact that I needed a kidney donor. And in retrospect, I should have. But to make a long story short, I did have a very proactive doctor who insisted that I do what I needed to do to get on the UNOS list. That was important because after it was ruled out that Ryan could not donate while he was alive, and one of the teachable points is after Ryan died from a gunshot wound, they asked if we would consider donating his organs. And I remember asking the nurse, but we have this trait, so how is it that he would be a potential donor? And that was the first teachable moment in that with being a kidney donor. I don't know about other organs, but once the person is deceased, his or her organs can be considered as being transplanted. My sister was in the room and she said, my sister, talking about me, is on dialysis and is waiting on a kidney. Will she be able to get one of Ryan's kidneys? And they had to think about it because at least at Duke University, where Ryan was, they had to think about it because they had not been confronted with the situation of a parent
Mm-hmm.
being considered to receive an organ from his or her own deceased child. Now we know about living transplants. To make a long story short, after some collaboration, it was decided that I would indeed be. And so we were dealing with the fact, when I say my oldest son was a private contractor, and he happened to be home from Haiti, and Ryan's father was alive. My sister came anyway. It was a family decision, and we relied on the fact that Ryan had wanted to be an organ donor when he was alive. So we consented. Well, we were notified that Ryan passed that, God, I've forgotten the day now, but I do know it was about 12:35 midnight, and I was told to report to UNC where my transplant took place the next day.
Mm.
I always tell people that it makes a big difference to know that when we arrived at the hospital, the people in the emergency room were aware of the situation and they just admitted.
Ms. Evans, and I'm just going to say from this point forward, please call me Donna.
Okay.
I
Okay.
do, and Dara, you can, I'm sure, have thought on this issue, particularly when I have female physicians on, but female physicians, I want to make sure that they are addressed by their credentials. And I always at least start off calling them, Dr. Kass. So, because too often they just go to first names for women in a lot of situations. And I want to make sure that, Counselor Evans and Dr. Kass, that you recognize. But here we're amongst friends, so just call me Donna, and I'll call, we're the 3Ds. We're very Yeah, we have something very special going on. So, Dara, I'd love you to pick up that point about transplant ethics and living donation. And one of the situations we see now are, the tales and the trend and the presumption is almost shifted that people are using every possible avenue, Twitter, Facebook, personal networks, to identify a living donor. I think in part because they recognize, the increased, survival rates and the health of a donor, but also because of the time that people are waiting in transplant, the toll it takes on the body, and the brokenness of the transplant system and the organ donation and organ procurement situation in our country. So can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so that conversation went through my mind in about a minute and a half, almost like a movie where like multiple processes are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of break it down for most people who don't have my own lived experience, right? So first of all, living donation is a gift on every level, because the idea is that you can take an organ that has been perfused in a human body safely and take it right from one human body to another human body with no downtime, which is, for the organ's health, is pretty remarkable. But you also get to do it at a time where it's expected. So you know that you can do it. The way I said it was, we did our transplant at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, when everybody had a full night's sleep, a full belly of food, had just gone to the bathroom. And I knew that I could prepare childcare for my other children. I knew that we could prepare my son for the transplant for himself. We could take the time off of work afterwards to heal as a family. So there's a lot about living organ donation that allows a sense of calm around the process of a transplant that doesn't happen when you're waiting for that call in the middle of the night for an organ from somebody that has been deceased. And obviously there's also this survivor's guilt, and I'm sure Ms. Evans can speak to this a little bit, but the idea that now, somebody had to pass away, not even internalizing that it was her own child, in order for her to live a fuller life off of dialysis. And so I think for me, the idea that we didn't have to incorporate that information into our family, that there was going to have to be a deceased person to keep our son alive, really was kind of like, it allowed us to solve the problem in our own family unit, which I think Ms. Evans could agree with there. But it allowed us to kind of keep it within our family. The process of procuring an organ that is from cadaveric donation, or somebody that's been deceased, is a mess in this country, and we're working on it very aggressively to clean up not just the process of how organs get found and how they get recovered, but also in the process of what it means to be a donor. I think one of the most important things we learned here is that Ryan made it well known when he was alive that he wanted to donate to not just his mother, but to be a donor. And if he hadn't done that, I'm near certain they would not have given her his organ. Right. Because there would have been a lot of questions of whether or not what the family's motives were, knowing they had just lost a child. And so he was able to speak from beyond and talk about it, divine intervention. But the idea that he could guide the whole family through that by taking that away from the family to have to make that decision because he made it for them early on is really something that I think people listening need to understand. Because if you, no matter that, you never know what the actions are going to be after you pass. But the idea that you could express that you want to be a donor even when you're living, so that if something happens, you are able to not have to burden the family with making that decision, even it could be in your own family, which is just a remarkable set of circumstances. And I just want to say that, the men and women, the people that work towards, kind of organ donation in this country work very, very hard. And their motives are very good, and they're trying to save as many lives as they can. But the truth is, the process of being an organ donor in this country, the way you have to pass away, the way you have to be on life support, the way the organs have to be recovered are so specific and unnecessarily complicated that it already decreases the amount of available organs we have to save our lives. So all of those pieces on the recovery end of cadaveric organs and deceased organs, and on the process of having the opportunity to be a living donor, has really shifted the paradigm to the point where if you can find an organ from somebody who can donate it, which unfortunately for certain organs like hearts and lungs we can't do, it is really just an opportunity to have almost purely positive experiences without a lot of the difficulty and negative experiences that exist from waiting for an organ from somebody who passes away.
Absolutely. And, having been on staff at the United Network for Organ Sharing right after my transplant, because my original career in child welfare advocacy shifted because of my experience, and in talking with my transplant surgeons, I just thought, in the infinite wisdom of a 24-year-old, that we could do better. and I wanted to be a part of helping make it better. And so, helping people to understand the transplant system, and then working within it to try to, improve performance and accountability, and working on bringing the insights of patients and donors, and also minority families and physicians. I remember back at that time, I personally knew every transplant surgeon of color in the country, because there were so few. There are a few more today, and I'm excited about new organizations like the Association of Black Gastroenterologists and Hepatologists, and the attention to ensuring that everyone has these opportunities to be on the list if they need it, to have a high quality conversation, to be able to donate and to organ as well. These are so personal decisions and discussions that do need to happen in context of faith and family and community, far before that instance of a loved one passing away, that we all need to be part of those conversations and those efforts to ensure that everyone can have a positive experience with this. Delores, I wanted to ask you, in your work and advocacy since your own transplant, some of the issues that you've focused on, and how you have communicated about encouraging people to donate, and doing more of this great work.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible, because I could talk about this for hours. I do want to, before I get into that, Donna, address what Dr. Kass said about being the recipient, especially after my son is deceased. It's been a struggle. I often respond to it as being a true oxymoron, because every time I celebrate an anniversary, this November will be 13 years for me. But every time I celebrate living a bonus year is also a day or a month or a year that my precious son is not with me. But what made this all bearable is the fact that we do have a close-knit, loving family. The organizations like Carolina Donor Services, and now I hope to be a part of the Global Liver Institute. These organizations have, in their own separate ways, helped me to be able to not only tell our story, but to make a difference. And we know we make a difference when people say, I hadn't thought about being an organ donor until I heard your story. So when you ask about how I have been able to deliver this, I wrote an essay, and I was selected to participate in the Rose Bowl parade. And having that honor meant that Ryan's picture was on top of a float. And as many people, I'm sure like you and Dr. Kass know, in the audience too, the Rose Bowl parade is broadcasted to 150 countries. So 150 countries knew our story. And while we were participating in that 4-day event, I met other donor parents, and I met recipients, and we all shared that same bond. There's something special about meeting the recipients, especially when your child is deceased. And I was able to meet 2 other recipients of my sons. I met and bonded with he was a young man who received Ryan's lungs. and also with the heart recipient. And I often say the first time I met the heart recipient, he said to me, "Would you like to hear your son's heartbeat?" Now, I'm tough, but that brought me, I had to grab onto the pews to keep from falling. And I literally bent down and could hear Ryan's heart beat in that man's chest.
Mm.
That is an awesome experience. And then when my own pastor, he told me, he said, I'm in a Southern Black church. And he said, "Sister Evans, my own mother was on dialysis and she died as a result of kidney disease. But it wasn't until I heard your and Ryan's story that I decided to register as a donor." So I know we make a difference. And for a while, I have spoken all over the country about our experience, and I'm gonna wrap it up. But I remember people coming up and saying how they feel my pain. And I'm a tall, statuous woman. I'm 5'8" now. And I won't tell you how much I weigh, but when little small people come up, I'm talking about people 5'2" and 5'3", evidently Dr. Kass, and they put their arms around me and they hug, and you can tell it's a genuine hug. Or they'll say, "I hadn't thought about being a donor, but I will, and thank you for sharing your story." Those little small things have helped us, when I say us, my family, to go through. So November of 2021, we'll celebrate 13 years.
That is
And
a powerful story. And
thank you.
so here's to many years of more authentic hugs, thanks to an organ donor. I am grateful for every day that I have lived and everything that I've been able to do to build a home and a family and businesses and in the Global Liver Institute because of my donor. So everything I do, every life I touch, every person that I help is because of that gift of life. And so thank you to wonderful people like you, Dr. Kass, who make the decision, even in the midst of their own lives, to give up literally a piece of themselves to solve these problems. Give you the last word before we close.
No, well, the way I say it, we say a lot, is that for us, it was a manufacturer's warranty. We made some bad parts in him and we had to fix it. And where else do you do that but with yourself? And so I think as a parent, that resonates a little bit. I just want to say, I want to thank you both, actually. I don't get inspired a lot by other people's stories lately because I feel like there's been a lot of chaos in the world and there's been a lot of hurt and pain. But this was a good moment, I think, for me. And so I'm going to thank you both for giving me this. I forget, it's been a hard year of stuff for people in my world, in what we've seen and what we've done. And so remembering that when we come back out of this together, we'll still have the opportunity to continue to save lives and make a difference, I think is exactly what I needed on this beautiful day. So thank you both very much.
You're very welcome. And thank you to both my guests. Thank you to everybody listening and watching. Thank you to all the caregivers of patients who are waiting on the list. And thank you to every transplant recipient who has persisted to that moment. Continue to tell their stories and reach back and reach out to strengthen others. You can find more information in our show notes. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please stay safe, stay connected. Thank you.
Bye-bye.